seemingly human-looking creatures exhibiting their bloodthirsty fangs and hunting people down in the night? Count me in. Yeah, I'm a sucker for vampire flicks, which means I've pretty much exhausted all the good ones, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Martin, and Thirst. As a rescue mission, I turned to the not-so-cinematically-great creature features, and trust me, even if film cultures often box them into the B-movie lane, they're absolutely worth a watch if you're searching for some pure entertainment. No, these movies do not make a lot of sense narrative-wise, and sometimes even the performances are painfully hilarious. But that's the catch, a good laugh. So, without any further delay, here goes my list of the 7 greatest vampire B-movies of all time. Grab some garlic and hop in. Plan 9 from Outer Space. Honestly, I learned about this film from random name drops in sitcoms. I remember how one of Ted's potential wives, Stella, brought it up as the worst movie ever in How I Met Your Mother Season 3, Episode 13, 10 Sessions. And honestly, this movie has been name dropped across geek culture for decades. The thing is, I love sitcoms, and when I hear people roasting the same movie again and again, obviously I get curious. So, I checked out Plan 9 from Outer Space, and I'm not gonna lie, I was actually surprised and also glad that Ted did not end up with that woman. God, I guess the entire world hates Stella. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not claiming that this is some remarkable piece of art. Rather, it's just peak B-movie chaos. The special effects were iffy, and the spacecraft looked as toy-like as you probably saw in Space Patrol. Even the acting was, I guess nobody was here to go home with an award, but that kind of charms you. Everyone is so committed to making you believe something absolutely foolish that you stop judging it after a point and just soak in the goofiness. I actually laughed my lungs out at one of the early scenes where we see a pair of airplane pilots spot UFOs and react so casually. Like it was just another Tuesday for them. One of them even asked the stewardess whether the passengers noticed anything. And the woman, she blankly replied that most of them were asleep. Yeah, even though it was broad daylight outside. Right from the beginning, you know what to expect from this movie. But before I defend it further, let me give you a quick idea of the story. The film opens in a cemetery, and we see a funeral that establishes the gothic tone. But almost immediately, mayhem starts when the pilot sequence I mentioned happens. Graveyard? UFO? You get the drift, right? We're not gonna watch a simple horror movie. Instead, it was like diving straight into classic Alien meets the undead territory. Soon, it's revealed that these aliens had a plan, and it involved bringing the dead back to life. Among the resurrected is Mila Normie, aka Vampira, whose funeral we saw at the beginning. She rises from the grave as this quiet, shadowy figure and just moves around through the cemetery. Interestingly, the film never directly calls her a vampire, because I guess they want to tie in both zombie and bloodsucker elements, but the way Vampira looked and moved screamed vampire. We also had Bela Lugosi popping up and repurposed footage, and that actually helped turn up the creep fact. Basically, you get a story that leans heavily into sci-fi with aliens and UFOs, but keeps pulling you back into an eerie and horrifying world. Yeah, it was messy, but that mayhem became part of the fun. It was like nobody got the memo of what they were doing, but I guess that's precisely why it worked. And Vampira's overly arched eyebrows were the cherry on top that gave it just enough vampire-esque flavor to keep horror fans hooked, because no way a normal woman would go for eyebrows like that. I agree with Eros saying in the film, all of you on Earth are idiots, because this film clearly deserves more love. Count Yorga, Vampire, 1970. I actually caught this one on television one night, and honestly, the creepy old country mansion pulled me in. Yeah, okay, the seductive looking women also played a part. Now, coming to the plot. The film follows Count Yorga, this smooth, mysterious guy who my girlfriend would definitely have a crush on, and he slips into modern-day Los Angeles' social circles. No brownie points for guessing that this attractive-looking man is secretly a vampire, and doubts begin as people around him start falling sick. Oh, and clearly lose a lot of blood. The story kicks off with Donna hosting a seance where Yorga, who already seems a little too connected to her family, shows up. Yorga gives out this calm, almost polite vibe, but you can sense that something about him is just off. And then, when a couple of her friends randomly run into him on their way back home, boom, it's showtime. One of them suddenly falls falls really sick and begins behaving strangely, leaving the doctors scratching their heads. And on top of that, people around Yorga slowly start vanishing. Sus 101. Pretty soon, you have this little group of people trying to piece together what on earth is going on, and every clue somehow leads them back to Yorga. Once that idea actually sinks in, the biggest question is not how dangerous he is, but what can you even do when there's an actual vampire chilling in LA like he pays property tax? And that's exactly what worked for me. Yorga felt extremely different for the era, and instead of the usual over-the-top Draculas and capes, he was this controlled and well-off bachelor. Now, whoever has watched this movie will agree with me that Corey deserves a huge shout-out. He plays Yorga like a film star who got turned into a bloodsucker. Let me give you an example. There's this one scene where he's sitting in a black suit while everyone else is giggling and not taking it seriously. But his expression and presence, oh boy, Corey had my heart from that moment. I mean, you could take my neck, sir. Now, yes, this is still a B movie. The budget and rush production clearly show that. And the sketchy fashion and makeup, and the movie screams B grade. But somehow it managed a good pace and stayed engaging. It even gave us moments where people actually tried to defeat the big bad vampire rather than just panicking. You know, like that bit where they all tried to keep him up until sunrise by nonstop blabbering. I get it. This movie might not hit the same way today, but back in the 70s, this approach brought freshness. And honestly, that blood-soaked finale, I swear to God, it would make a lot of PG-rated films today look like a kiddie show. Blackula, 1972. We owe a huge shout out to Blackula for being such a great social and political commentary, and frankly, the way William Crane helped to reframe the vampire genre through a black-led blaxploitation lens undermines the fact that Blackula was considered a B film. He explored this subgenre known as blaxploitation, and Blackula became one of the defining early landmarks of black-led blaxploitation horror in the face of mainstream white monsters, such as Frankenstein's monster or Dracula. I know Blackula has been rightly called out over the years for stereotyping the community and limiting their identity to something more brutish and primitive. Yet, Blackula had its moments, and that's exactly why it got a spot on this list. For instance, Dr. Gordon Thomas, played by Thamas Rasulala, showed that an African-American man could be a civilized contrast to Blackula. His attire, professionalism, and most importantly, trustworthiness all made him stand out as a hero. The movie follows Prince Mamuwalde, who honestly had one of the most tragic vampire origins out there. The guy literally went to meet Count Dracula hoping to do some good about slave trading, but instead ended up being cursed and turned into a vampire. Yeah, I guess he's not that good at making deals. Cut to the 1970s, when his coffin somehow makes it to Los Angeles, and obviously chaos ensues from the moment it's open. Mamuwalde wakes up in a completely different world and starts navigating the modern setting while dealing with his whole vampire situation. Reminds me of Cap coming out of the ice, not gonna lie. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of just going full bloodthirsty mode, he becomes fixated on a woman who looks exactly like his lost love from the past. So now we have this non-human man trying to reconnect with his past love, while bodies start piling up around the city. Naturally, the police and a doctor get involved, attempting to figure out these inexplicable deaths. And as they dig deeper, it becomes pretty clear that they're dealing with something otherworldly. No sooner said than done, it turns into this cat and mouse game across Los Angeles, with Mamuwalde leaving a trail behind him, while also trying to hold on to whatever bit of humanity he has left. The scene in the end where he kisses his beloved's hands with nothing but regret and pain in his eyes actually stung. That said, I acknowledge that the appearances and the fangs were definitely ridiculous, and the newly turned vampires running with their arms open elicited more laughter than fear. I also wanted a little more gore and blood in a vampire film, you know? Like some flesh coming off of the vampire bite or something like that. Still, Blackula stood out for relying on a sad origin story, tying it with identity politics and a touching romantic angle underlying all the mayhem. In a loose modern comparison, you could almost call it a spiritual ancestor to something like Sinners. Tragic vampire mythology, black identity, romance, and blood all colliding in one story. William Marshall, too, was just perfect as Blackula, with a strong screen presence. And Thamas Rasulala also nailed the portrayal of a cool, forensic guy. But for me, the real highlight was Vonetta McGee. I've liked her ever since I saw her in The Great Silence, and she looked amazing here too. Also, some of the dialogues like, a bat, a giant bat, were so funny, and they live in my head rent.
Car.
The Velvet Vampire, 1971. No, please do not skip this movie thinking it's some carpet branding gone wrong. Thanks to streaming, boutique Blu-rays, and cult film continuities and cult film communities, hidden gems like this keep crawling back into the spotlight every day. And the idea of cult classics has gone truly global. Speaking of cult movies, I have to bring up Roger Corman. Horror lovers will instantly recognize that name. But here's the thing. Roger Corman's New World Pictures helped to define this whole drive-in exploitation ecosystem. And some of the films connected to that world ended up unfairly buried. That brings me to Stephanie Rothman's The Velvet Vampire. We meet this young couple, Lee and Susan, who come across a somewhat intense woman named Diane at an art gallery. Diane did not seem to like small talk or boundaries, so she straight up invited Lee and Susan to her place in the middle of nowhere. I mean, a desert. Run. But no, obviously the couple accepted her offer. Horror movie logic, no questions asked. Soon it stops feeling like a casual visit when Diane becomes way too provocative. On another note, Celeste Yarnall's sexy vampire persona is one of the best things in this movie. I still cannot get enough of her lying on a bed in bright red nightwear. However, as time passes, the seduction comes off a little too weird, and the house's gloomy atmosphere with those long candlesticks adds to the suspense, and it goes off the rails pretty quick. Diane clearly has her attention fixed on the couple, especially Lee, and Susan is clearly not having a great time. But Lee, he doesn't seem to mind so much. Understandable. Then, Susan has this strange dream where she and Lee are out in the middle of the desert when things start getting a little too intimate. Diane suddenly shows up out of nowhere, literally stepping through a mirror and pulling Lee away. And the weirdest part, it's not just her dream. They both seem to be experiencing the same thing. No, it doesn't even stop there. Diane walks in and catches Susan inappropriately. V for voyeurism, I guess? After making things super awkward, she invites them out for a ride in her bright yellow dune buggy, like everything is completely normal. Hey, that dune buggy was cool AF. By the time the couple realizes that Diane has a plan, they've already walked right into it, and the situation's already out of their hand. This was honestly one of the most completely unhinged erotic vampire thrillers where logic just took a back seat. We were thrown straight into the story with barely any setup, and from there it just jumped from one odd moment to another. Not exactly what I was expecting, but also not entirely complaining. But let's be real, a lot of the film relied more on the softcore seductive vampire angle, and there was a lot of skin tapping into the whole 70s erotic vibe. But surprisingly, it's not that badly made. The acting's actually better than what I expected from something like this. There's some genuinely wild moments too, like Diane casually sitting and eating raw liver, or washing her hands in a fountain calmly after killing someone. Those kind of shots stick with you. The film keeps throwing these weird, almost random scenes at you, but somehow it stays entertaining. But the real surprise here was the music. It was this strange concoction of psychedelic rock and experimental guitar, topped with eerie ambient sounds, that somehow struck the right chord. Pun intended. Honestly, it deserved a proper release on its own. Direction-wise, some moments felt inspired by European cinema, which is not something you would expect from a film like this. So yeah, it might be clunky and indulgent, but if you're in the mood for something that's unexpectedly watchable, this one delivers. Vampire Hookers, 1978. As of this check, the movie sits around 3.9 on IMDb. And you might be thinking, what on earth am I doing here talking about it? But hey, hear me out. Vampire Hookers was definitely not a good movie in the usual sense, and I definitely should not have thrown a tantrum at the video store asking my mother to rent it. But if you were into these 70s B-horror exploitation films, this one fit right in. And obviously my mom didn't get it, so I managed to get a hold of it in this old downtown theater that played mostly B-horror and grindhouse stuff. And weirdly enough, it stuck with me. And trust me, the theme song alone was enough to get me to watch this movie, which is probably why it's never left my mind. The story revolves around two U.S. Navy sailors, Tom Buckley and Terry Wayne, who are on shore leave in Manila and mostly just looking for a good time. One of their fellow officers, Eddie Taylor, ends up meeting a mysterious local girl in a bar, and she leads him back to what seems like her place. But things take a sharp turn when it turns out her home is actually a mausoleum hidden inside a cemetery. There's an aging vampire with a couple of seductive companions already waiting. Eddie quickly realizes he's walked into something very wrong and cannot make it out in one piece. When Tom and Terry start looking into what happened to their friend, their search eventually leads them down the same path, right into the strange underground world of these so-called vampire hookers. Interestingly, we had John Carradine in this as the head vampire, which felt kind of wild. wild? See, we're talking about the guy who was in Stagecoach and Grapes of Wrath. Big shot Hollywood stuff. And somehow he just showed up here. Carradine was deep into the anything goes phase of his late career genre work, and here he seemed fully committed to the madness. He spends most of the film wandering around in a white suit, and sometimes a giant matching white sombrero, casually quoting Shakespeare and various poets like he's performing at some strange midnight show inside a vampire movie. But it was an absolute treat to watch it. Now, the thing is, most John Carradine movies from this era already sat at the not exactly great category, and this was definitely no exception. We got bad voiceovers, questionable acting, topped with some wacky props, and a completely unhinged sense of direction. There was even this long, awkward orgy-style scene that just went on and on for no real reason, other than, because the movie said so. Even the music kept cutting in and out like nobody checked the final edit. So why watch it? The humor. Absolutely unintended. The whole thing plays like it's trying to be sharp and clever, but it ends up sounding so goddamn funny. We get lines like, "It's not murder, it's dinner." And of course, scenes like these. Subspecies, 1991. Produced under the Full Moon banner with Castle Film in Romania, Subspecies is a direct-to-video horror film that began its journey in 1991 as a low-budget flick. I know there are polarizing opinions about this franchise, which ran until 2023, with some calling it cheap-looking. But in reality, nothing is cheap about Subspecies, and the movies are an absolute treat to watch. Coming to the first one, the poster screams B-movie. The very color grading and artwork of it? Yeah, it kind of tells you what you're in for. It follows the typical exploits of the vampire lord Radu Vladislas, but trust me, Anders Hove's performance made the usual narrative stand out. In my opinion, he's one of the main reasons this film series worked. Across the franchise lore, Radu is tied to King Vadislas's cursed bloodline, while Stefan is presented as the more human-looking half-brother, who has moved closer to the mortal world. So, what makes Radu a villain? Yeah, the makeup and the scary face established him as a monster, but it was actually his drive to get the ancient artifact, Bloodstone, that made him do a lot of awful things. For starters, he killed his father to get the Bloodstone. The story revolves around a group of American students who arrive in a quiet Romanian village to study folklore. And of course, they befriend Stefan, who even falls in love with one of the students, Michelle. Radu, who is in pursuit of Stefan, ends up preying on Michelle and her friends, turning them into his slaves while Michelle and Stefan try to defeat him. See, the plot is basic, and the effect is even grainy at times. It gives out a distinct old-school vibe, but director Ted Nicolau played on the movie's weaknesses and turned them into his strengths. The use of pre-CGI practical effects and the 4:3 aspect ratio, loved it. I always have a soft spot for practical effects, so yeah. Moreover, Radu reminded me of a vampire version of Pennywise the Clown. Not gonna lie, and him coming out of his coffin was an amazing moment. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly are the subspecies in this movie? Well, this is where the movie gets so damn interesting and a little frustrating because you don't get to see much of them. So yeah, Radu could literally cut off his own fingers and they turned into these grotesque little demon creatures that did his bidding and could even bring him back if he died. It sounds insane, I know, but Ted Nicolau used stop motion for these imps, and honestly, they were kind of a charm to watch. Last but not least, the film had a banger soundtrack, and personally, one of my favorite bits is during the scene in which a student encountered the funeral wake where people were dancing and playing instruments. In short, Subspecies is kind of gothic 90s vampire flicks that deserves at least one watch. Alright guys, that's all for today. I know these movies might not be exactly cinema masterpieces, but they have some absolutely great performances and are so much fun to watch. I swear to God. Moreover, if you're a vampire flick fan, chances are you often find yourself looking for something new and exciting, and this list might just be what you need. Do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked this video, don't forget to share it with your friends. I'll see you in the next one, and as always, don't forget to stay marvelous.